servant of sin. Notice that. The servant of sin. As I've been studying, there's different things. Different people think that there's different demons with different names. But yeah, I think I'm not saying there's a demon called sin here. But you know, when you choose to open yourself and deliberately know this is wrong. You know it's wrong. You know, there's no question that it's wrong. Bible clearly says it's not a gray area. It's not one of those things where could be wrong, could be right, probably shouldn't, probably not good for me. But this is clearly wrong. You know what? When you choose to do that, you are going to become a servant, yielding yourself. You become a servant to sin. And you're opening yourself up. That influence, the devil is actively making you yield to sin. John 8:34 is very clear that once we start going down that path, as I said earlier in this series, in Mark chapter 5, this man who becomes possessed didn't start out that way. We know he had a family because he goes back to it. We know he probably had friends because he goes back to them. He didn't wake up one morning cutting himself. That's interesting. Why do people cut themselves? Again, major problem, especially among teenagers. Cutting themselves. You know why? They say it gives them a high. What did this man do once he was possessed under the influence of a demon? He started doing what? Cutting himself. Just a thought, folks. Just a thought. He begins to go this way. But you know what? Eventually, how did it start? It started one step. A step at a time. Again, I believe the devil tricks people, and we get involved, and we start getting involved in some things, and pretty soon we're trapped in something, and we become a servant to that sin. One step at a time. How else do demons influence us? Turn to 1 Samuel 15:23. I've used this verse many times, especially if you're a young person in here. If you're a parent, I want you to lean over, make sure your kids see this verse. 1 Samuel 15:23 says this. You know the story here. This is when Saul, again, was still, in a sense, trying to follow God, but he had rebelled against what God had asked him to do. And he goes, and look what it says here in 15:23. Rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of God, of the Lord, He has also rejected you from being king. I want you to look at those first two statements there. Rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. Stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. You know what happens when we begin to rebel? Teenager? Kids? When we don't do what mom tells and dad tells us to do? Now, I'm not going to say 100% of the time. You could just be being ornery. Okay? But you know what begins to happen when we begin to rebel? You know what? We need to be careful that again, something's not behind that. I think all of us who've raised children, and again, I'm treading on lightly here. But in looking at the lives of my children, looking at the lives of others, we raise our kids right. And we wonder, What happened? They're saved. We know they're saved. For some of us, we've led them to the Lord. They've been baptized. They go into, and then all of a sudden, again, like I say, maybe a step at a time. But it's that rebellion that begins to happen. That rebellious spirit. Where does that come from? I think sometimes it's not just adolescence. It's not just growing up. You know what it is? Something's influencing that. There's a rebelliousness. Once we begin to rebel, a teenager, you need to be careful that when you start saying, I'm not going to do what mom tells me to do, I'm not going to do what dad tells me to do, I'm going to do what I think is right, man, you're opening yourself to something very dangerous. I would say this, not actively seeking and yielding to sin, spiritual rebellion. I think also what opens us up to this kind of influence is when we associate those who are already involved in it. 2 Corinthians 6:4. 2 Corinthians 6:4. 14, excuse me. It says, be not unequally yoked together with unbelievers, for what fellowship has righteousness with unrighteousness, and what communion has light with darkness? Again, notice some things here. There's light and darkness. Jesus Christ is known as the light of the world. What is Satan known as? Prince of darkness. There is a lightness, there is a darkness there. There's righteousness, unrighteousness. Verse 15 talks again, what concord has Christ with Belial? Belial is another name for the devil. What part has he that believes with an infidel? What agreement has the temple of God with idols? For you are the temple of the living God. As God has said, I will dwell with them and walk in them, and I will be their people, and they shall be my people. We need to be careful who we associate with. You know, and I'll go back to the previous verse here, because we do have some teenagers in here. Man, if you're running around with bad kids, they will influence you in a bad way. It will always happen that way. The influence is there. But I think for us as Christians, we need to be careful who we associate with. And who we associate with not only in the public realm, but obviously things like what we saw on the Grammys this year. We may not be actively participating. We need to be careful what we watch on TV. We need to be careful what we go and watch at the movie theater. Because I may not be friends with them. But by participation, guess what's happening? I am becoming linked up with them. When we link up, man, they will always pull us away. And I think we, as Christians, we could become associated with some stuff that we should never, ever be associated with by association. How many times have I seen, especially in the years I was a youth pastor, and I was a youth pastor for 14 years. Okay? Almost all of Patty's kids were in my youth group at one time in Roswell. And I know that there, and Patty might know who I'm talking about because she lived back there, but you won't, most of you won't. But I had a girl in my youth group. Her parents were good people, always there, always at church. Dad could have been a little more faithful, but the mom was always there. Mom was there, sang specials, sang in the choir, did the books for the church. Her grandparents were some of the godliest people I ever met. Always there at church. And this little girl started hanging around with bad kids. And I always wondered, you know, she would always come to church. But I noticed something about this girl, Ashley. She always sat in the back. Never could get her to sit up closer. Started talking to her. And you know what? Because of her bad influences in her life, she began to rebel against stuff. I could tell, especially when I was teaching, especially when I was preaching. Believe it or not, we see things, don't we? Yeah. Okay. And this little girl, I could tell, at times, was really turning me off. Pretty soon, a couple things began to happen. She didn't know whether she was heterosexual or not. Actually, we took a middle-of-the-road path there. Parents came to me. Mom came to me weeping. Can't you talk to my daughter? Can you talk to my daughter? I'd go and I'd try to talk to her. And you know what? She would just turn me off. I'd try to talk to her. Are you saved? She would say she was saved. And she could give me a great testimony. Talked about how her grandmother led her to the Lord. How that she got baptized. And I said, are you sure you're saved? Yes, I know I'm saved. But she had begun to go down a path because she was linked up with other people. Now, when we get to heaven, is she saved or not? I believe she was. I think as a little girl, she genuinely was born again. But because of association, she started going down a bad path. And because of association and demonic influence, guess what she did? She got to the point whether she didn't know whether she was heterosexual or not. Later out, she found out that she was, because she was living with a boy. And just went in a path that completely shocked her parents, completely shocked her grandparents, completely shocked everybody. Why does it happen? You know what I think happens? We open ourselves to an influence that begins to pull us away. We need to be careful who our associations are. My clock's not working in my pulpit. Somebody give me a time. 11:30? Wow, I better. I'll give you one more way. I think that we open ourselves up to this kind of influence. Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4. Well, Brother Bygel, I am not actively seeking it. Brother Bygel, I don't actively seek that stuff. I know it's wrong. I don't do it. Brother Bygel, I'm trying to live pretty good. I'm not constantly yielding to sin. I'm really not rebellious. I'm not a teenager anymore. I'm pretty good at work. I listen to authority. I'm not rebellious in any way. Brother Bygel, I watch my friends. So I don't have to worry about this. Look what Ephesians 4, 26 and 27 says. Be angry and sin not. Let not the sun go down on your